Shalom, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday night. I hope it'll be a good night for you. It's been a very thinking night for some of us already as we go through some of the things that I've sent in my notes to people. We're going to talk about, again, last week we talked about the first 4 millennium in time and how science and Torah were not together but apart. Now we're into the 5th millennium, which is about the 2nd century of the Common Era. And that's the time of the Romans. That's the time when the church, the Catholic Church, basically was science. Whatever the Pope said or the Archbishop said became the understanding of science. All of the sciences were under their command, under their control. And so as we look at what we're going to talk about, we're looking in the 5th millennium at science. The Jewish people did not spend any time after the fall of the temple studying science. In fact, I in my notes, of the top 100 scientists during that 5th millennium between 220 and 1240, between those two dates, the top 100 scientists, none of them were Jews, none of them were Europeans. Everything came from Asia or the Middle East. And by Middle East, I'm talking about the nations of Turkey. I'm talking about the Muslim nations. Islam was very advanced at that time. They were the characters that did the science. They were the ones who studied. They took what they learned from the Greeks. The Greeks began the conversation. The Greeks took the world and changed the world by giving them this common understanding of science. We're going to talk about Pythagoras because that's very significant, even though that was a, 2nd century or 2nd millennium, lots of years ago. But let's go back. To begin with, I want us to understand the fact there are 3 things that, according to the Vilna Gaon, who is one of the brightest minds that Israel has ever produced, he said there are 3 things that are important for us to know. One is Mount Sinai and Torah. 2 is the understanding of science. 3 is the understanding of mathematics. With those 3, one is able to really decode the scriptures. Now, by saying that, we have to understand the Vilna Gaon spent much of his time correcting mistakes that he found in the Talmud, because again, the Talmud was written, but most of it was taught orally. And so he reconfigured some of the language so that it was a common language for all of them. But at the same time, into the Talmud were also statements of nature and science and astronomy. The Vilna of Gaon spent his life studying nature and the heavens. You know, we are told that you're not to spend any time studying scripture while sitting on the toilet. Well, he, like every other human, had that same problem. He had to use the restroom. When he went to the restroom, he spent his time writing a book of calculus. Do you understand what I'm saying? Calculus wasn't even created then. He created calculus. He began to take all of the numbering systems and he began to advance them. That's where he comes from. That's why he says math is so important. But we also understand math is in the language that we have. In the Torah, every letter is a number. Therefore, you can begin to look at the words and you can begin to get number ideas. As I was sharing before we went on the air, if you go to the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse number 1, it says in English, God spoke all these statements saying. Now, all these statements that he spoke are the 10 commandments. That same line has 7 words 22 letters, and the value of all those letters is equal to the value of, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And you look at that word, those words in Hebrew, you will find out that there were 7 words and 28 letters. So the story begins by understanding that you can match phrases with phrases. What I'm trying to tell you by the fact that here he begins with saying in 20, chapter 1 is sayings, 10 sayings. There are 10 commandments. So the commandments themselves fit with the original 10 sayings that he had in the book of Genesis chapter 1. Now, I do not have the answers to all of those, but there are answers in the Zohar because it does speak to those 2 phrases and how they match. Actually, it's not in the Zohar itself, it's in the Zohar Tikkune, which is the interpretations of. It's another set of volumes that deals with the same idea. So everything begins with language, sounds, speaking, but there's no written language. Language is simply oral, sharing one with another. If we look at Adam, Adam wrote nothing down. If we look at his son, Cain, Seth, nothing was written down. Language itself did not become something that they understood until much later in time, during the days of what we would call Enoch. Enoch, which was the 7th son from Adam. That's when we began to have what's called a written language. And understand that written language does not look like Hebrew today. That written language was pictures. Each picture represented a letter of the Hebrew alphabet that were created and put together to create ideas. So there was no such things as verbs and adverbs. Everything was a noun at that point in time. And they began to interpret from those nouns everything that they were working with. So it was a very, very complex system. But the numbering system was already being used from the very earliest days. Because from the very beginnings, bartering was going on. And as you're bartering, you're going to have to determine how something is measured against something else. Everything from how much dirt you've taken from a hole, everything was measured back in those days. It was very much a part of the system. Now I'm going to take for a second, and I want to try to open up my screen, and I want to show you a picture. Yes, this picture is taken in China. The picture you're looking at is the dragon or the dog called Tufu. Tufu is an image of an ancient Chinese god. Actually, he guarded the gods of China, and it's at their very sacred temple. And according to their understanding, this temple was created 6,000 years ago. Time out. Look at what this thing looks like. Do you see the metal? Their understanding of elements was far different in China than it was anywhere else. They were one of the first societies, according to many of the historians, and this dog Tofu, or this Fu dog, was gripping on to what's called the flower of life. The flower of life. The flower of life is this metal ball here. That's what the tower of what it is all about at that particular point in time. So as we're looking at this particular picture, this flower, I want you to notice the shapes. And I'm trying to get to the second page that I've created, but I can't get there from here. So I'm going to stop for a second. Nope, I don't want my notes. I'm going to go back again and see if I can pull it up. And I'm going to advance it, I hope, to this one. Now, I don't know if you can see it. Can somebody tell me you can see what I'm showing? Can anybody see this?
No.
Okay, well, then I got to go back to where I started from to share. Technology is wonderful if I were young enough to really know how to use it. Okay. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. According to the stories of creation, this is a story that was found not only in China, but it was also found in Egypt. And according to the Egyptian understanding, this was information that's in the tomb of Osiris, their underworld god. The underworld god, remember, goes through seasons, and then the season rolls around, the seeds open up. The one on the far left is called the seed of life. As you can see where it is, it's 7 circles with what will be in the next one, a circle around the circles. But these 7 circles represent the 7 days of the week. They represent in Chinese the chakra, or the understanding of the living soul. They speak of things that are fundamental to science. In fact, if you were Leonardo da Vinci, if you were Pythagoras, if you were Nikola Tesla, if you were Albert Einstein, this is what you would have spent much of your life studying in your off time. So this is the seed of life. This is what begins life. Now, if you look at the center where all the circles meet, that is called a matrix. Matrix is the Greek word. The Hebrew word is reem, or womb. This is the womb. In other words, life comes from the womb. And so it's beginning to open. So this is the seed that's beginning to open, creating what we would look at would be a flower. Now, if you would go back and put it into the soil, the middle one represents what it would look like in the soil as it has died and is preparing to come back to life again. Again, you can see this where the circles overlapped in the seed of life, in the germ of life, you just have the basics. As it begins to grow, you look to the right. That's called the flower of life. In the flower of life, you now have that same circle of 7 surrounded by another one, or the 8th, the new beginning. It's also the idea in Kabbalah, it's the idea of Zimzum. It's the idea of the womb, that outside this womb is where God is. Everything else is inside the womb. Everything else is found within the days. That's why there's these days that are going around on the outside. This is what they're talking about. Now, as we go through this understanding, this is what they were beginning to try to understand. So this flower of life is going to be an ancient symbol. According to the earliest, and according to Einstein and Nikola Tesla, one who understands the flower of life understands the universe. All scientists want to understand the universe. They want to know how it works. Now, if one knew how the universe worked, one could control the universe, which has led many governments to spend a lot of time and effort to try to understand how to control the earth, how to control what's going on. Now, these geometric shapes, next time I'm going to show you the same geometric shapes in the flower of life, only I'm going to show you that as geometric solids. In other words, we've now been able to look at these flowers and we've begun to see the diamonds, the Hebrew star, all of the different solid geometric figures can all be found in this star of life, or in this flower of life. And so science now is progressing in this direction. When they become close enough, Torah and science will become one. When Torah and science become one, We are in the world to come. That's how close we are to understanding. We're just now beginning to grasp many of the concepts that are here. And I'll spend next time a lot of time trying to explain the shapes, how they fit, what goes on, all of that in the next lesson. But tonight, I just want to give you an understanding of really where we're headed in science. We think many of the scientists today are atheists. Even the Jewish scientists are atheists because of the fact that they cannot merge in their minds. Science is a deductive process of reasoning. Religion is an inductive way to learn. It's kind of like Thomas Edison created direct current, but it was Tesla who created alternating current. No matter which current you're using, there are three variables that you need to understand: energy, frequency, vibrations. Those are the three things that really run the world. Everything in the world, your bookshelves, the tables you're writing on, the pen you're working with, all of them really aren't there. Because you see, everything is composed of atoms. Can you see an atom? No. The understanding is that everything is more like a hologram than like reality. We are living on a TV screen. That's the way science would look at us right now. So we have this seed of life that was identified long before the flood. It was identified in China, and it was identified in Egypt. It was identified in lots of different places, but those two places are thousands of miles apart. No way to communicate, but both of them have the same thing. In the pyramids, where Osiris was supposedly buried, he wasn't buried there, but in the pyramid, you will actually find embedded in the wall the flower of life. We saw the dog foo, or the foo dog, in China. All of these countries, all of these nations have this common flower that I'm sure many of you have never seen before. It is something brand new to you. But science has been working on it for thousands of years. Now, as we go through this, we have to understand, okay, from the very beginning, we had 10 generations that occurred before the flood. The first generation was Adam. The last generation was Noah. And actually, it was Methuselah. Noah crossed over to the other side. But excuse me, those generations, when we begin to look at science, have to notice something. If we only use the Bible, we know that in the very beginning, Cain and Abel had professions. The profession of Cain was growing vegetables. The profession of Abel was shepherding. So much of what we understand about the earliest generations deals with agrarian societies that depended upon food staples that they could gather or they could raise. And so many nations, just like there are today, Bedouins who move from place to place in order to graze their animals, in order to create enough food variety to maintain their lifestyles. It was not until Cain's son, Enoch, who was the first from Cain. Enoch means educate. The education that Enoch received was the ability his dad created for him a city. Now, if you're going to have a city, that means that your society no longer depends upon going out, and your society can begin to grow. And if you go through the rest of Cain's children, you find out they began to do metal work. They began to become musicians. They began to move through what we would call the hierarchy of things. They no longer depended on just food, clothing, and shelter. They were beginning to understand lots of things. At the same time, we had Havel or Shem's line. Shem's line does the very same thing, but it's not until we reach Noah that they begin to invent metal instruments. Those metal instruments were the farm implements. So he now took the agrarian lifestyle and he began to create the plow. He began to create the instruments needed in order to harvest. All of that was done during the time of Noah. And that's because Noah's name means rest. During the days of Noah, man could finally rest from his labors, and he could move to a 6-day work week if he wanted to. Now, as we go from there, we move to Noah crossing over. The next things we read about after Noah crosses over is the city of Babel and the tower that he creates. The interesting thing, or the most important thing we have to understand about the tower was in the shape of a ziggurat, or what we would call a flattened pyramid. A flattened pyramid. Now, the intention was supposedly that they were going to build it so tall that they would not have to worry about the flood. They could always go to the top of it, and it would be above the flood waters. I'm not sure that's quite true, but I'm understanding at the top, it was also what you would call a platform for sacrifice and a platform for observations. Because you see, they were heavily into studying the stars. Remember, Abraham comes out of the Tower of Babel situation. He's found in the next generation, born in 1948 from creation. 1948, Israel became a nation. So we're watching the parallel between the life of Abraham and the life of the nation Israel. So as we watch it go through time, we're actually watching what's going to be happening in our world. The Zohar spends some time talking about this relationship. Now, remember, it was written supposedly by Shimon Bar Yochai in the 2nd century after the destruction of the temple. But he's predicting ahead of time through his book, mystically, that there's going to be a reformer, a Messiah that's going to lead us into a return to the land. That was Abraham. Now remember, Abraham doesn't immediately go to the land. Abraham eventually ends up in the land. So we're not sure whether the whole thing started in 1914 when the Balfour Declaration was, and so that's the beginning of this final age, or whether it starts at 1948 and we're working our way out. All of this is somewhat scientific, but the intention is astronomy. Astronomy has been one of those sciences that has been studied for centuries. In the days of Enosh, who is the third son or the third generation from Seth, it was during his age that people no longer were praying to God. They began to pray to the stars. And the reason they chose to praise to the stars is the fact that they thought God would be busy trying to listen to all their prayers. So therefore, they created for themselves this other being. Now, science, or the Bible tells us, or indirectly tells us, that the stars are governed by angels. There's an angel for every star, every planet, everything that's up in space. There's an angel for everything on this earth. Everything has an angel. In fact, when I was growing up in church, my pastor used to tell us that he had 2 angels and he knew who they were, because he said, surely goodness and mercy, those are his 2 angels, followed him all the days of his life. So he understood that idea of angels with him all the time. But as we go through this, we have to understand that they began to pray to angels. Now, I went to a Catholic wedding one time. I used to be Catholic, but I never remembered going to a wedding, but I finally went to a wedding in which the bride and the groom, after going before the priest, left the priest and walked down and walked over to Mary, the statue Mary, and they began to pray to Mary to intercede for them with God. The same process was going on in the days of Enosh. This is nothing new. We also have to understand that God had some leniency towards the idea of idolatry because he didn't stamp it out. What he was against was where idolatry was leading. That was the Canaanite way, the Amalekite way, the way of sacrifices of human beings, the way of the Moabite, or not the Moabites, but the Amalekites would take and bury a fetus in the corner of their building. That would be bringing it luck. We were trying to sell our house back in Indiana early, not this house that we moved from, and it wasn't selling. So my dad, being Catholic, went and got a statue of Joseph. And Joseph is the patron saint. So he took Joseph and he buried him upside down in our backyard. And the plot was sold within a week. So my dad understood that idolatry works. And I didn't even bother to go into it with him. But you can see that idolatry has been a part of our cultures for years and generations. And even good nominal Christians practice idolatry of some sorts by the use of the Trinity or whatever you want to have. God has to look upon that and figure it out himself. I'm not going to go there. But as we begin to understand what's happening, there's a constant change in what's going on. But understand that civilization, even for the Aborigines, goes back to the flower of life. Aborigines, Australia, barely wear clothes, still hunt with spears. They still follow the flower of life as part of their culture. So the flower of life is going to become very, very important. But as we're walking through these centuries up through Abraham, the one thing that we have to understand is astrology was significant. Mythology was significant. Many of the stories that translated came out of a mythological understanding. And the third thing that was important was mathematics. These were the sciences that man lived by. It was only later, as they began to become more and more cerebral, if you will, that they began to find characters who could raise their understanding, develop the people themselves. So language starts early, but not the written language. It all begins to grow together as we go through time. Now, the number systems itself are different from place to place, but the number systems were first used in the creation of calendars. Calendars. Every nation has its own calendar. Today, we see the same thing. We have the Gregorian calendar that we live by. The Jewish calendar is different than the Gregorian calendar. Number of days. Instead of a leap day, they have leap month. In the case of Islam, their calendar is also 354 days, but it never catches up. In other words, their year is only 354 days long. And so their holidays may occur in the middle of winter, or they may occur in the middle of the summer. There's no telling because every 354 days it starts over again. And so Ramadan has passed through multiple seasons. That becomes a part of understanding what's going on. The Greek religion itself was based on a calendar that was created by Pythagoras and Aristotle. There's constant changes of what's going on. In fact, it was the early Greeks that created the word which we call cosmos. The cosmos was around us. The word cosmos means order. They looked into the sky and they saw the order of the planets and the order of everything else. And everything was a circle that went around the earth. but everything was flat. Even the earth was flat. It wasn't until later that they began to identify that the earth itself was round. According to our understanding in the book of Psalms, Psalms already told us that the earth was round. It was David who began to share that with us. It is David who began to share with us that there's rivers in the sea, that there were actually lines of water where you could actually move from one continent to another quickly. It was Christopher Columbus who proved there were these rivers in the sea. In fact, he found over a course of time in his 3 trips across that he could actually save himself a month on the water by going down to the Canary Islands and crossing there. All different kinds of things were happening. Now, science then began to look at everything. Aristotle and Archimedes, those men began to look at the animals, nature. They began to explore it. They began to see things in it. They began to notice the shapes of things. They began to classify. In fact, it was the Greeks who classified almost everything that we now see. But as they're going through this, Aristotle's words lived on. Charles Darwin tried to use Aristotle's words to create for us the understanding of evolution. All of it goes from one to another. But the idea of evolution, we know, has become quite convoluted, and it's still around, but it's not around everywhere. All of those things happen. The understanding of the earth and moon, how the moon changes. In the beginning, mythologically, we found that the moon just didn't come up or was hidden by the god as we go through life. But Archimedes also was a great mathematician. And in his understandings, he made different approaches to rather, well, inconvenient kinds of ideas. But he was dominant in his understanding of physical sciences. And he began to do lots of things. He created what we would call the magnifying glass. He used the magnifying glass in a giant mirror that he used to burn the sails of the ships of the Persians as they attempted to cross over into Greek territory. The 5th millennium, by the time we reach this point, the 5th millennium, the Jewish people are hovering. They're going to go from one exile under the Romans to being exiled across Europe and across Asia. They will find themselves in Russia. They'll find themselves in northern Iran, in Iraq. They'll find themselves in China. They'll find themselves moved out by a constant holocaust, if you will, a changing of what's going on. But the world still keeps learning. But it's not because of the Jewish people, and it's not because of us Europeans. It's because of what's going on in the rest of the world. Now, as I was saying before, of the top 100 scientists who lived in that 5th millennium between the years of 240 and 1240, out of that 100, there are no Jews, there are no Europeans. They're Chinese, they're Turkish, they're Muslims, they're all different kinds of religions, but they are not what we would normally think of. Now, as you're going through this understanding of nations, you have to come to the point of the 6th millennium, because this is where things begin to change. And learning becomes something that happens not in the beginning of the century, of the millennium, but towards the middle. Because you see, that's when the great, 1240 was the Dark Ages in Europe. But it was not the Dark Ages when it came to learning Torah and understanding things. The Zohar became popular among the sages of the time. There was the great Ari, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, who was the first of these characters. All of these men were polymaths. The word polymath simply means they understood multiple sciences and language. Isaac Luria knew multiple things, and it began at an early age. Nature became part of the study. And if you look at the major characters of this century, I talked with you about Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci spent the first 14 years of his life because he couldn't go to school because he was the son of a bastard. And because of that, he spent all of his time in nature. He took with him a book and he began to draw and write notes as he went through everything that he would see from the different types of ponds, the water, excuse me, all of the things that were happening. Also, in that same period of time, there was the character that I started out with, and that was the character of the Vilna Gaon. He too had notebooks filled with understanding of nature, of astronomy, all of the things that we would have to understand as we get closer to where God would have us. Also, there was Nikola Tesla, which I talked about 3 weeks ago. Nikola Tesla, who creates the alternating current, he created 450 patents. Now, the 450 patents came from 60 trunkloads of information. The government, when he died, took 80 trunks out of his house. So that means 20 trunks, because I can do math, 20 trunks never appear. We don't know what he knew. We know that he could create an automobile that ran on electricity, not a car battery like you and I would think of. His car ran on the earth. The energy of the earth provided enough energy along with the electricity for his car to go up to 90 miles an hour, which in the day in which he lived was faster than any roadster they ever had created. Imagine what would happen if President Biden would find out about the electric car that Tesla made, and understand he didn't need gas. He didn't even need electricity because he ran on the energy of the earth. Imagine all of the inventions that could be created if you had just simply understood, again, vibrations, again, the understanding of energy and frequency. All of that is going to go into next week's lesson. But anyway, there were lots of characters that were mentioned in our story. Somehow I just lost you, but there I are back again. The understanding is that there's a lot of things that we can learn and should learn. One of the things that's now being understood is frequency. The music you listen to will either enliven you, calm you, or drive you crazy. If you were to listen to heavy metal for any length of time, what do you think it would do to your mind? Yes. Do you understand that whole heavy metal came from a man named Goebbels, who was a Nazi, who began to change the frequency by which music was played at? Nelson Rockefeller, well, actually Rockefeller's family, also took and changed the frequency of the music to 640 hertz instead of 435. And by doing so, they made it necessary for people to use medications because of the fact that they could no longer be healed the other way. Hezekiah, I got to go back again to Hezekiah. Hezekiah was a great scientist. He created a book in which all the diseases that were in that age could be cured. In fact, it was happening. The only problem was, he said, if you're going to use this book and if you're going to follow these directions, at the end, you need to give God the credit. Problem. People began to use the book and began to be healed, but there was no credit given to God. Hezekiah burned the book. No one will have it. The same thing must be true today. If we understood the frequencies by which we can be healed, wouldn't it be nice not to have to take a pill? Wouldn't it be nice not to have surgery? Wouldn't it be nice to cure cancer? Well, all of those things are yet in our future. They're not done. But as we go through next week, I want to again go back to Da Vinci, go back to Tesla, go back to sound. I want to understand in the very beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and he did it with sound. He did it with frequency. That's where we're going to go next week. And hopefully you'll begin to understand. I gave you no real biblical book to go to tonight, but I want you to just think about it. Exodus 20, verse 1. And if you could look at the Hebrew side, count your letters, count the number of words in Exodus chapter 20, verse 1, and do the same thing for Genesis chapter 1, 1. You'll find out that there are 7 words, 26 letters. And according to that, you'll find in the Genesis chapter 1, there are 6 olives. The 6 olives talk to us about beginnings. The beginning of Monday, the beginning of Tuesday, the beginning of Wednesday, the beginning of Thursday, the beginning of Friday, the beginning of Saturday. We have the days of the week. All of that's in chapter 1. All of it comes from the very first verse when God spoke it all into beginning. And he created the flower of life, the flower we're all chasing. Okay, I've talked for 45 minutes. I don't know if you realize that. I've given you a short version of my notes. I've got much more that I've written in my notes. If you're interested in my notes, I'm willing to send them to you. All you got to do is just give me your email address and I'll send them out to you so you can have them. I make them every week, and they're for me to give me a handle on which direction I'm going. But again, there's so much to learn. And I guess that's probably why I've left what's going on. For some of you, I don't know if you know, but I've written commentaries on all of the books of the Old Testament, except I'm going through the last one, which is the book of Job now. But I'm going to start putting some of my commentaries for some of the other books on the NETIV, so you have something else if you want to look or read. And so my first project is going to be the book of Obadiah. It's only 1 chapter, but it's very appropriate for today. So anyway, I'm done talking. Anybody have anything they would like to say?